Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm of course your host TJ, coming with a little longer video today, as I like to do. I originally was going to talk about Bury Your Gays and the Gilded Age, but, I'm kind of sick of dwelling on negativity, so I thought instead I would talk a little bit about why it's important that we look at histories of queer experience that are more joyful, or that demonstrate the extent to which queer people can survive, that our narratives that are encoded in history aren't always ones of misery or living in the closet or having our loves end up tragic. And I've been reading this new book called Queer Enlightenments, which is about exactly that subject, talking about a number of figures who lived in the 18th and early 19th century, and, through one reason or another, managed to have quite secure and often quite happy queer lives. I've also, of course, as you know, been reading a lot about King James VI and the Duke of Buckingham, who obviously had a very deeply queer relationship. Obviously, I don't want to force our understandings of gender, sexuality, and those kinds of relationships on the past, because I tend to be one of those who thinks that it's kind of anachronistic, but I do think that it's acceptable and even, I think, necessary to talk about the extent to which the past is filled with figures who are non-normative in terms of gender or their sexual behavior. Admittedly, they may not have inhabited the identity of LGBT in the way that we think of it now, but that doesn't mean that, same-sex behaviors, that gender non-conforming people did not exist. And I think that the risk we run if we, try to be too particular about not forcing the past is that we risk erasing ourselves from the narrative, and I just don't think that's the case. But more to the point, I think when we watch shows like The Gilded Age or Downton Abbey, which admittedly are later than the books I've been reading currently, but they are all sort of in the past. Like, they're far enough in our collective history that they feel less immediate. Certainly, something like Downton, that's in the early 20th century, Gilded Age, late 19th. Again, we're talking about the Enlightenment, which immediately predates the Gilded Age to some degree. But my point is that all these historical narratives tend to frame queer experience as one being about sadness. Like, if you look at a lot of the tradition or the popular representations of the past, again, Gilded Age, Downton, you look at the Tudors, you look at many other shows that are set in any kind of past that feature queer characters. We have characters dying or feeling suicidal or ending up alone. So my point is that there is a tendency within popular historiography, if we think of shows as being popular historiography, or if we think of fiction itself being grounded as a way of shaping how people think of the past, there is the sense that queer experience in the queer past is itself traumatic, it's filled with sadness, it's filled with death. And I mean, that is true to a degree. Like, I'm not saying that the past is some sort of utopia. One of the incidents that the book that I'm reading now, Queer Enlightenments, talks about is the arrest of a bunch of practicing sodomites who were then, many of whom were then executed, hanged for, indecency. And, so I don't want to gloss over that. But at the same time, I do think that there's something really radical about the idea that queer people have managed to not just survive, but thrive in the past. And I find that's particularly important nowadays when we're just sort of inundated with these stories of on-screen death, when we're obviously facing tremendous pressure from all kinds of government bodies. We're seeing the stripping away of trans rights. We're seeing the potential overturning of marriage equality. We're seeing this sort of backlash to the equality movements and the civil rights movements we've had for the last 50, 60 years since Stonewall, if not before. So what I'm getting at is that I think, we owe it to ourselves to understand our history and to read our history and to celebrate our history of every day. I mean, obviously, October coming up is LGBT History Month, but it's important to not just rely on those months, but to educate ourselves, to seek out those works that will help us have something to hold on to. Like, I do insist, as an eternal optimist, as a joyful I'm on the joyful end of the Pisces scale. I do think that it's absolutely vital that we hold on to these narratives from the past that show us stories of queer joy, queer survival, queer resistance. Because I think that when we abandon ourselves to these sad queer narratives that we see so often in pop culture histories, like I said, the Gilded Age, or when we see it in, contemporary pop culture where gays are seen as expendable, and I'm looking at particular films like Gladiator and, spoiler alert, Weapons, we're seeing this backlash, and I just think that it's to our benefit as queer people, even our straight brethren, owe a lot to themselves and to our ancestors. Like, we have an ancestry and a history. We have genealogies that are worth investigating, that are worth celebrating, that are worth uplifting. And if we want to, have a, what do I want to call it? Do we want to have an ideal toward which we can move, or a suggestion or an indication that it doesn't have to be this way, that we have survived before and we will again, then I think we owe it to ourselves to read these stories of remarkable queer figures, to learn about them in all of their complexity. Like I said, I've been reading about the Duke of Buckingham, I've been reading about King James, I've been reading about these queer figures in the Enlightenment. So what I'm saying is, if you can, go to your local library, get seek out these queer authors who are writing these important histories, and I think that we'll all be better for it. We can learn so much from the past, and we can also feel so much from the past. We can feel the optimism, the joy, the power, and the elation that comes from true queer resistance, especially if that is given the weight and the magnitude that comes with history and of knowing the past. So, if you want, go check out those books. I'm going to be doing more full reviews of Queer Enlightenment once I finish it, but I just wanted to sort of drop that in because it felt like a really important subject to talk about, to sort of tie together all the things that I talk about here at the Queer Guide, the Pisces Guide. Movies, TV, books, history, and feelings, all that I think is really important now more than ever. So anyway, go out and read books of queer history. I promise you won't regret it. So that's all I have for now. So for the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture, I'm of course your host, TJ. Take care, y'all.